So we're looking at some embedded applications that live within a NetSuite or Microsoft, finance environment versus just having our own platform. And how do we leverage, right? Not rewrite our functionality to live inside of those platforms, but leverage architecturally the different components and things like that. And then the other one is you've probably seen a couple different press releases and articles. Hypopotamus and some folks have given us some good coverage lately. We've launched a couple new products. And so again, we're trying to figure out how do we switch from a lease accounting company to a company that offers a controller suite? And what does that mean to be multi-product from a user experience perspective? And how do we start to pull all these disparate applications together to make sure that controller and the accountants have one place to log in to solve their complex needs? So some good stuff.
It is some good stuff. That sounds like a pretty big transformation.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, cool. We need to grab a coffee or a beer soon here. Yeah,
definitely.
So yeah, for those of you who don't know, Jeff actually hired me for my first true product management job back at the Silver Pop days. Prior to that, I was doing product management, didn't exactly know it, and so we've been together for a long time. And I didn't have any certifications for those who were here on that session last week. So. And we got time for one more. Let's welcome, let's see, a new face here, Philip Canning. Why don't you say hello to us and introduce yourself, Philip?
Hello. Yeah, I'm Phil Canning. I work at Ally Bank in their concept testing studio called TM Studio. And yeah, do a lot of facilitation, leading a lot of design thinking projects. I've worked with Jason Rome quite a bit. Hey there, Jason. So I thought I'd tune in, see what he has to say here.
Well, now that you and Gio are here, I can't use you guys as a case study at all today. I'm having to change my whole pitch now that you guys showed up. Like, you gotta be
how not to transition projects back to the mothership.
Yeah, I gotta be careful here now.
All right, cool. Well, we're just about at 8 o'clock. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Phil. Glad to have you here. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here for a moment, and I'm going to just kind of walk you through a couple resources. First of all, if you go over in your web browser to productcoffee.com/resources, you will see our resources page. And on that page today, so far, let's see, are we sharing? Can you see that?
Yep.
All right, great. So on our resources page today, we've got a link to Jason Rome's LinkedIn profile. He's going to be Jason's going to be sharing with us in a moment. I'll give him an introduction in just a moment. But a lot of times we get the question is, will the slides be available? Yes, I'll post them to the resources page at the end of today's session. And I've also got a satisfaction survey, a post-event survey. If you would, before you leave today, click on that link and run over to fill that out and let us know what you thought about today's session. It helps us make them better. There are a few other resources for you here as well. Next week, we're going to have a different day for Product Coffee. Next week, we have got the first in our 4-part series on product and market research from the Pragmatic Institute. They put together a really powerful 4-part series for us. But because Wednesday is a big teaching day for them, they've asked us if we can host these on Friday instead. So that series will be taking place on Fridays, and they will be on the third Friday of each month for the next 4 months. We'll have is that the second or the third? Third Friday of each month. First one next week, we'll kick off with Paul Young will be back. We're going to start right at the beginning of the session. We're going to kick it off at noon. It's going to go until 1:30 next week. So block that out on your calendar. It's going to be a really powerful introduction to the Pragmatic Institute content and thinking on market research. The week after that, we got Mark Stiving, the pricing doctor, is going to be here. That's going to be a Tuesday edition. So on Wednesday of next week, we are going to have a lightweight meeting. We're going to have a volunteer meetup here for Product Coffee for those of you who have raised your hands and said, hey, I'd like to help out. And there's a link right there on the resources page for you to go fill out the little survey that I put out. If you'd like to raise your hand and help out with some of the volunteer opportunities here at Product Coffee and Product Camp this year, you can fill that out and you'll get an invitation to next Wednesday's call where we'll be coordinating some of those activities. I do want to thank our sponsors. We got a couple of great sponsors already this year, and the first is Skookum. Jason Rome, our speaker today, is a senior vice president over at Skookum, as is and Jeff Meddy is our Atlanta market managing director. And Skookum has stepped in as our diamond sponsor this year and is really helping to support the product management community and help getting this content out there to a wider and wider audience. So check them out, check us out, and take a look at what we can do for you and some of the clients that we've got, some of the design thinking and the customer experience practice that we have on the table to bring and help you grow your business. I also want to thank our platinum sponsor, Pragmatic Institute, who is one of the most recognized names in product management and product marketing certification and training. We had a really good discussion on that last week. It is up on the YouTube channel, which you can find right here. There's on the checklist, there's a link to the YouTube channel. Go subscribe to that. And we've got the certification discussion last week. It was a really rich discussion. And finally, if you want to have some input into the types of topics that we talk about, you can head over to productcoffee.com/ideas. And you can vote on the suggestions that we have for future sessions, and you can make your own suggestions. You'll see that we've done quite a few of these. The Art of the Impossible, Preventing Design Thinking Failures is one of our top requested sessions, and we're doing that one today. You'll see we've got the Product and Market Research Methods series that we've been running for a little while, and the Pricing Strategy series right there at the top. We've got a few newer ideas. Steve Youngblood's session is rolling up here near the top as well. We need to get Steve on the calendar, and I'll reach out to you this week, Steve. So that's our kind of a kickoff. The last thing I want to point out to you is we have a link here for the notes for today's meetup. If you would click into that Google Doc, this is where, for those of you who are new, we do a collaborative note taking on this. So as you're taking notes from today's session with Jason, feel free to jot them down in this collaborative document. You can drop your name down in the contributors section, if you can throw a link to your LinkedIn if you'd like to. Just use that to connect with people. But the idea here is we create a living document with multiple perspectives for all of our note taking in this event, so that you can get the thoughts that resonated and registered with you, as well as the other folks who were here. And this is a permanent document. You can bookmark this if you log in with your own Gmail or Google account. You can save this to your own drive so that you've got a copy of it as it gets updated and evolves. We do have people sometimes come in after the fact and add a few later thoughts to the information. We don't publish this out except for on the resources page, and really promote it to the people that actually come to this event. So this is a really great way to connect and collaborate on the content that we'll be discussing today. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to introduce our guest today, who is Jason Rome. As I mentioned, Jason leads the digital strategy and customer experience practice at Skookum, which is who is our sponsor, as well as the company that I joined back in November. And Jason's got a lot of really great thoughts on what it takes to go from the theory and the process behind design thinking to actually getting the concepts and the innovation that you create in those sessions and using those processes into productive work and delivering innovation to your customers. So Jason's going to walk us through some of his thoughts today and give us some new perspectives. So thanks, Jason. Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jason. This presentation is a keynote, and I haven't used Keynote since the last time I gave this talk, which was actually February of last year at a design thinking conference in Denver. So I've never tried Keynote with Zoom before. So let me make sure that you guys are seeing the right view and not the presenter view as I get started here. So, all right, which one did you guys get?
We see the right one.
Okay, perfect. I got lucky here today. So the genesis of this talk was, we get to work with a lot of clients, and they ask us about the art of the possible, and come in and do workshops and do design thinking. But we also have the opportunity to come in and pick up after design thinking has been done by other groups. And more and more, I was kind of coming in, and we were starting on projects, and we would get these massive PowerPoint decks full of ideas, and like so many good ideas. And I kept wondering to myself, why isn't this stuff making it to production? Like, why isn't it being developed? And so the talk today, as I mentioned, something that we originally developed for a design thinking conference in Denver. But a little caveat is I realized after giving this talk the first time, it's a little bit preaching to the choir, and I probably should have everyone's managers or the business sponsors on here for the product teams, because that's who needs this lesson. So the hope today would be that you get some pragmatic things that you can take back to the team. So feel free to interrupt throughout and have conversations. A little bit back about my background, actually, Sadie, kind of funny enough, I also come from a psychology background. So before coming to Skookum, my other option was looking at graduate programs in organizational design and behavioral economics and psychology. So Thinking Fast and Slow, probably one of the most influential books I've ever read. I also have some CDs out on Spotify. So that's my personal plug when I get in front of people, because I'm really trying to break double digits on Spotify followers. So I think if I could get 2 people from this group, I'd get there. And I think the other ones are all, my mom made like 8 accounts to make me feel good about myself. So as mentioned, work here in Charlotte and work for a company called Skookum. And the people always ask what a Skookum is. So I'll leave this slide in here because it's convenient. I will say that, especially after last year, really grateful to have a job that's very remote friendly. But I also absolutely love my job. It's a lot of fun. I get to just meet really awesome people every day, and I get to hear about their problems. And in every conversation, usually I get a chance to teach them something, but in every conversation, I learn something from the people I work with. This is such a fast moving space in design and strategy and product. At the end of the day, I would explain our company as it's just kind of solve fun problems with fun people. And that's really what we do, and whether it's our clients or our team nerds. So we're kind of, we go across the solution lifecycle. As I mentioned, a lot of fun, going from CX and empathy to prototyping. I'm going to focus on the front end of all of that today. And really the genesis of this talk comes down to 3 beliefs: is we can have better quality concepts come out of design thinking. We can get more of those concepts into implementation, and these concepts can drive results for the business. And so these are the 3 core beliefs I have about what design thinking can do and what it can do better, and how we can grow it and move it forward. So first off, what is design thinking? This is a big one, because a lot of people, if when they put the image of design thinking in their head, it's a workshop. And design thinking is not just the workshop. It is a way of seeing the world. It's a way of looking at things. As always, I went to the source of truth when I wanted to know what design thinking was, Wikipedia. And so, a couple different definitions. Design thinking refers to the cognitive, strategic, and practical processes by which design concepts are developed. And then human-centered design is an approach to problem solving commonly used in design and management frameworks that develops solutions to problems by involving the human perspective in all steps of the problem solving process. And I really love these definitions, because design thinking, it's meant to be more of a verb than a noun. Like, it's not something you are done with. It's not something you've done. And a lot of people treat it as a box to be checked today. A team will go in and they'll go work with the design thinking team, and they will say, we have designed thought. But, really, and we'll talk about the importance of iteration here in a minute, it's not meant to be a checkbox. And so the first mental model that I like to emphasize with is, start from the right place. And design thinking, it's not an exercise, it is a muscle. And so you wouldn't go to the gym and bench press once and say, I've worked out, and I'm going to go move on to something else in my life because I'm strong now. Design thinking is very similar. Like you don't go in and you do it once and you get good at it. You go and you do it multiple times and you do it slowly and you develop the muscle. And like a muscle, it starts out weak for all of us, and you have to work it out because it's a way of looking at the world differently. And Phil, and Gio, you guys are up on my screen, and so we've done a lot of design thinking sessions with the Ally team, and we bring in new stakeholders. And the second day is always much more fun than the first day, because on the second day we're all paper prototyping and we're doing a lot of fun exercises. The first day isn't fun because as much for people, because it's a lot of the empathy and the research, and it's retraining people how to think. And so the first time you go to work out with a physical trainer, it's going to hurt and it's not going to be fun. But it takes this retraining and this mindset of design thinking being a muscle, not an exercise. The second thing that's really important is success comes from iterative understanding and not democratic averaging. I use the analogy of a maze here for this. And so, if I put this dot on here, and I can't leave this screen up for too long because all of you product problem solvers are solving this and stop listening to me, so I have to move on. But if we did this like it was a design thinking session, we'd each put a sticky note up, and I would say, okay, what direction does everyone think we should go first in this maze? And we would try to average out what direction we should go, and we'd stay in the exact same spot because everyone's going to have different opinions on what direction we should potentially go to start this maze. And that's what happens in a lot of these design thinking sessions. When we come in and it's an opinion-based kind of voting exercise, and that's the only method we have for this, that's just our starting point. And the design thinking, the workshop, the session, it's just the starting point. You're at the beginning of that maze when you're in that session. And so there's this concept in innovation that the idea that ideation and the art of the possible is the most valuable part of the session, and the ideas have value. We're all in products. We've all had that friend that's like, hey, you're in product and tech, right? Like, I've got this big idea. Maybe it's your uncle at Thanksgiving and he's got this app idea and he's like, I really need you to sign an NDA before I tell you about my idea. And you're like, come on, uncle, I'm not going to sign an NDA with you. Like, just tell me what your idea is and I'll tell you what it is. And it's an idea you've heard a million times before. This happens in the enterprise too. Like, people are so worried about just like what the idea is versus the interaction and the creation of that idea. And I've always said, like, hey, give me 4 people for 2 months versus 40 people for 2 days if we're going to solve a problem. Because every time we go out and we talk to a user, every prototype we do, we're going to get a little bit smarter. And it's great to start with that big group to crowdsource ideas, but again, it's just the start, and it really takes time to learn and iterate, because we're all going to be wrong, and we just need to lean into that. Versus relying on kind of crowdsourcing this big idea. So that's one of the first ones I always start with is, it's about iterative understanding and not just the democratic averaging of opinions, which leads to really good ideas. This next one with art of the possible, a lot of people say, hey, we need to take the constraints off. We need to go completely blue sky here. And in studies they've done in around psychology, I'm not sure what's going on with my slide there, but constraints can actually add to creativity. I always think about this as the Apollo 13. It's like we have this set of supplies and we need to make this thing fit into this thing, and this is the only stuff that we have. Like, those constraints made them more creative. If they had all the materials, the movie wouldn't have been as exciting, but they had to kind of solve the problem that way. And when we ignore our constraints, we come up with a lot of great ideas that don't necessarily make it to production because we haven't been considerate of those along the way. And you get a lot of very angry engineers or technical product managers that are getting these ideas, and someone's saying, oh, here's this great idea that came out of our 2-day workshop. Like, let us know when you'll have it done in your backlog. And you look at your backlog that's about 18 months long, and you're wondering like when you're going to have time to get this in. So it's really important to introduce these constraints at the right time around desirability, feasibility, viability. Jason, I'm sure you guys have had sessions on different prioritization frameworks. This is one of our favorites just because it's really easy to have a very low fidelity version of this, especially on the feasibility side. We'll talk about the engineers in a little bit, but a lot of large companies that are trying to innovate and trying to build out these new ideas, they're also architected on what looks like a pile of spaghetti when you put an architecture diagram up. They're also trying to do a cloud transformation. They're also replatforming their CRM and their CMS, and they're moving to a new front end framework, and they're putting an API gateway in there. They're doing a lot of stuff to modernize their architecture, but that means some of these ideas are going to be slower than others. And you have to lean into where the organization is, otherwise it's going to be hard to get things done. And so making sure that you have people in the room that have a diverse set of views and can challenge these ideas and can introduce the constraints at the right time in the design thinking process to start to kind of narrow that cone of uncertainty, so that when you're getting to a handoff point, you're going to get a good result. And so, with this process, we don't necessarily always have this. We assume design thinking, hey, we're going to do empathy, we're going to do a journey map, we're going to test this, and we're going to prioritize it, and we're done here. But then, like, when we go and hand this off, the reactions that we get kind of confused people of, why are we doing this? We get concern over why it's happening, and we don't have time. A quick story. We did some work with a large company to help them with their omni-channel transformation. So looking at their customer acquisition process across multi-channels, and figuring out what that customer journey was and how they could merge multiple platforms to bring that together. They had a second project at the same time that was reimagining some of their servicing solutions for their customers. Omni-channel again. There is a bank. They were trying to combine, make sure their bankers in the call center in the branch and how people digitally serviced across multiple channels had a similar feel to it. And I remember when we bid on the RFP, the executive stakeholder said, "Hey, can you do this work without working with our team?" And this was a client we'd worked together a lot with before. And I said, "We could. I don't think we should. I feel like your team has already solved or knows these problems really well, and they know what's feasible and not. And if we went away from them, I don't think we'd be able to get something to implementation." And so we kept meeting, as we were doing this innovation and journey mapping, we kept meeting with 40 or 50 stakeholders twice a week for, this whole process. Meanwhile, they had engaged this other group that kind of did this from the outside in without talking to any stakeholders. At the end of this big project, we each had a 4-hour presentation that we had to give to all the executives about how we were going to digitally transform everything. Our presentation, we were able to go through a lot of the stuff. We kind of talked about how we were going to move it through to execution. They went and presented, and the product owner for the product said, what is all this? We have regulatory issues that are filling up our entire backlog for the next 18 months. We have no ability to take on any of this work. And their chief digital officer stood up and said, "This isn't how any of our processes work. Like, none of this is feasible. None of these ideas are going to work at all." And so, this idea of like not introducing the right constraints, we actually ended up picking up that project, and there was a lot of great ideas, like really transformational ways around moving money. We had a lot of people in the payment space. Unfortunately, we had to throw 90% of it out just because none of it was feasible. It wasn't grounded in regulatory compliance. Being a bank, we had to start there. So I know it's not always fun to bring those constraints in. And, when you're setting up your invitation list for your design thinking workshop, you're like, do I really want to invite the back-end IT team? Do I want to invite that person from legal risk and compliance? Yes, you should invite those people, because you're going to have to overcome those challenges eventually, and you might as well bring them into the process. This brings me to the next one, which is fall in love with the right problem, not the solution. So this is usually as fall in love with the problem, not the solution. I think it's really important to fall in love with the right problem, because not every problem is worth solving, and not every problem is going to generate revenue for the business. And the problems that aren't connected back to the business's core mission are going to be ones that don't get the long-term funding that they need. This is my absolute favorite quote. And anyone from Ohio, there's actually a town named after this guy, Charles Kettering. He was a big inventor in the automotive space. A problem well stated is half solved. A problem well stated is half solved. I love this. It's the idea of just spending all your time really ensuring that everyone's on the same page is what is the real problem we are trying to solve, versus jumping straight into solutioning. There's a lot of really cool technology going on right now. But starting with the cool tech and trying to work it into your set of problems can be really difficult to end up with a solution that's viable. A really good example of a group that didn't necessarily have a well-stated problem is this Cheetos chapstick. So you could see a bunch of people sitting around in an innovation group with Cheetos. And I had a bunch of examples in here. I try to pull examples from like the 90s about products, just in case I have a product manager that like rolled out one of these products. One of these days, someone's gonna be like, I was the Cheetos product manager for Cheetos chapstick, and they're gonna get really mad at me, but hopefully it doesn't happen. But what was the problem to be solved with Cheetos chapstick? Like you want to take all of the good out of eating the actual Cheeto and just end up with like your messy face at the end of it. Like what was the innovation here? And so, another example I used to use, and it was more applicable when he was president, but Trump rolled out Trump Steaks in partnership with Sharper Image. So Trump and Sharper Image got together, and their product they rolled out was Trump Steaks. Again, not a problem necessarily to be solved that ties back to either of those groups' core business value. I love this comic. I think product people can all relate to this, to meeting with their manager and the business getting really excited about technologies and saying, hey, what are we going to do with blockchain this year? And so like, just do it, do the blockchain, and then also do the artificial intelligence. Eventually, Jason, we probably need to collaborate on a talk around what people really mean when they say artificial intelligence. I think that'd be a fun one to do. But just making sure that when people are talking about these technologies, you work people back to a problem, really ground them, really get common understanding of what that looks like. The next one, this rule number 5, and we've got some people with a psychology background: design for who people simply are, not who we wish they were. This is a big one because, we do personas and segments and journey mapping and empathy maps, and it really grounds us in a customer's problem. And then, when we start ideating on it and we start developing our product, we start adding all the things that we would want. And a product ends up with like the aggregation of all the things we could do versus simplifying it down to 1 or 2 things that we want to test to validate that really solve the problem, that's that set of foundation that we can build on. And we're all humans, so I think we can all relate. Like humans, like we make a lot of emotional decisions. It's not the rational actor model that economics assumed for so long. It's not, if we just build this right solution, people will come to it and they'll adopt it. We have to work within the framework we're given. We have to understand that for most of us, the products that we're building, we are not the user. And so really empathizing with who people really are, understanding how difficult change is, and leaning into that is really important. A couple examples, we talked about empathy maps. I think cigarettes are a great example. The American Council came out with a big, paper about, cigarettes are bad for you. They cause cancer. They're killing people. And what was the result? Like almost nothing. And so what did they do? They taxed cigarettes and they put them behind the counter. And that is what reduced smoking. So I think it's a really important example because it's, hey, telling people the right thing to do and appealing to their rationality versus hitting them in the wallet had very different outcomes here. Another one of my favorite examples that I think most people have heard is the organ donor example, where they looked at some of the European countries with really high organ donor rates, and they were trying to reverse engineer why that was. They found that the only reason was that it was defaulted to opt people into organ donation. They weren't more gregarious, they weren't more generous, but when you were going through and filling out your license, it was an opt-out process versus, an opt-in process. And it was like a 60% swing in organ donation. So that's another really good example of like lean into the defaults. And so use these heuristics of who people are, understand, what's going on in their processes already, and understanding like how can you fit into what they're already doing and fit your product into their life versus assuming that we are building this master product that people are going to come to. Another kind of old example of this in mental models, this was a early concept from Apple of what they thought the future of user interfaces would look like. And so compare this to the slick, clean Apple UI, everything's hidden with the bottom bar now. Early product developers, and if you look at the, Yahoo versus Google homepage as another example of this, or, MySpace pages versus social media now, it's a lot of products that people assumed wanted very busy, a lot of things, everything in one place. But people want to do one thing at a time. They want kind of simpler, cleaner user interfaces that they can use. And I think that's really important in innovation and work now. Transformation without adoption leads to building cool stuff no one uses. We'll talk about change management, and actually it's perfect timing because KU was talking about AR and VR earlier, and we've done some work in the utility space using augmented reality and virtual reality for training scenarios and different use cases. But a great product innovation early on was Google Glass, and it's actually the technology is coming back in the training and the industrial space, but they originally rolled it out as a social product. And they didn't think through the change management aspects of it. They didn't think of communicating the value. They didn't think of the social pressure that they were working against. And a lot of times, there's this big chasm in the innovation and product work we do of like, who's going to handle the change management? Who's going to communicate the value? Who's going to reinforce this? How are users going to take it? One of my favorite, it's not really a law, but kind of product mental models is the rule of 9X. People overvalue what they have by 3 times, and they undervalue new things by 3 times. And so unless your product is 9 times better than the experience they already have, you're going to face some uphill battles with getting people to adopt it. And so really building change management and adoption into the early part of your process is really important and really key. When we're talking about digital transformation and innovation, we talk about communications, content strategy, and copywriting, and change management as like the 3 forgotten heroes of change management. Of digital transformation. The joke I liked is, these are some Netflix shows about the importance of these topics. So The Sopranos talks about the importance of good communication. Mad Men, which is a show all about good content and copywriting, and Game of Thrones is a show completely about the lack of good change management and the negative results that come from poor change management. And so really bringing kind of the communication, how you're going to talk to users, how you're going to value message a product into your design thinking. One of my favorite exercises that kind of Google took from Amazon and is proliferated now is the press release exercise. So when you get into a design thinking session, having everyone write a press release for the product that they are thinking about. What's a quote from a user? What are the value that people are talking through? What's the name of the product? How are we rolling it out? Like actually write the press release and use that as a forward thinking. Jeff Bezos, that's still how he evaluates new ideas. Now, Amazon took it a little far. They had people writing press releases for APIs at one point, which is a little bit overkill for the process. But that's one of my favorite things is use that at the beginning of kind of a solutioning to say, okay, we've got this new product in the market. Let's pretend we're releasing it. What are people saying about it? And really ground people in like real statements that real people would say about it. So getting to the end of design thinking sessions, the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. So Michael Porter quote here. I hit on this a little bit earlier, but making sure when you're walking out of an innovation or design thinking session and you're working on building a prototype, that you're able to really test what you want to test. And a lot of times what we see is extremely feature-rich prototypes that put a burden on testing because it can be difficult to test the individual features versus the holistic product. And so a lot of times in a product that we're testing, people might like some of the features, but they might not want to buy the product as a whole. And you have to make sure that we're able to test those individual features so we sense the value, because not everything that comes out of design thinking is going to be a standalone product. We might discover a really valuable feature that we should be just bolting on to our existing solution, to our existing product. A couple of years ago, there was a trend in kind of app ecosystems. And so Foursquare did this, ESPN did this, Facebook did this when they split Facebook out from Messenger, and some brands did it well and some didn't. But ESPN split their apps into 5 or 6 apps, and they saw a real dip in traffic and had to bring those apps back together. And so there's a downside to kind of splitting your brand into too many different technologies, too many different products, too many different apps that people have to use. And so be really careful about what you're adding. And we always say in design is finished when you've taken everything away that's unnecessary, not when you've added everything to it. And it's the same thing for strategy and design thinking. I'm gonna jump through some of these so I can get to questions, but it kind of ties into this next point where in design thinking, perfect is the enemy of good, which is originally a Voltaire quote, and Sheryl Sandberg, I think, did a version as well, which is perfect is the enemy of done. And so same thing in design thinking, we have to lean into the ambiguity, because this is where we end up at the end of design thinking sessions. And like there's kind of this, what are we going to do with all these ideas? We have so many ideas and we want to make sure we capture all these insights. But the key is removing all the ideas we don't want to pursue right now, not capturing all the ideas we've come up with. And so if we look at, the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do, and perfect is the enemy of done, we really have to, as product people, as design thinkers, product is just a series of trade-offs. And our role is to kind of winnow it down to what is the next thing that we can do? What are the next 2 or 3 things that we can do? Not capturing everything that we could do into the future. Capture the insights and keep those, but making sure that you walk out of design thinking with 2 or 3 ideas that are testable versus 25 really good ideas is, if you take nothing away from this, that's probably one of the most important things today. Because those 25 ideas, they end up in a PowerPoint deck, they end up on the shelf, they don't end up going to implementation. And I think that cognitive overload is one of the things that paralyzes, whether it's an executive business sponsor that has to fund the work, or whether it's a product team trying to decide what to do next. Really, our job as leaders is to winnow that down and get to a smaller set for this. And so, the goal should be going from that to this. What's that one sticky note? What's that one big idea that's going to provide a lot of value? This is my last one. And, at Skookum, a client called us realists one time, which I think was the greatest compliment that we've ever gotten. We try to be very pragmatic about strategy, about design, about technology. We're actually seeing this more and more in the design space right now. The sites that win design awards these days are not the sites that facilitate business outcomes. And a lot of people are still thinking about digital as a channel versus digital as an expectation. And you don't like your digital experience really standing out and feeling different. Well, that was a really good thing, 6 or 7 years ago, because it was a kind of a unique channel. It was a differentiator. Like, if you stand out too much these days, it probably means you're using visual design and UX patterns that are a little too different for people to understand. And so getting back to my main point, being pragmatic, really respect the engineers, bring them along for the ride, consult them. If you're in a workshop or a design thinking session, and you can look around the room and there's no one on the product or the engineering side that has a technical background that understands the infrastructure that this solution we've built on, if you're not building from scratch, like, we probably have a problem, and we should probably pause and we should figure out how to bring engineering into the conversation as early as possible. There's a trend, we call it left shift, which is where we're trying to shift architecture left into the process so it's earlier in the pipeline so that development can get accelerated sooner. Because otherwise you end up with a really big gap between ideation and development while you have to go back and have conversations about platform architecture, about system integration, about data, about hosting. And if you can figure that stuff out a lot earlier in the process, you can move the whole thing forward and get to implementation faster. Wouldn't be worth talking about engineering and product without a Dilbert cartoon. You know, we work with a lot of engineers. They get very angry at you when you come to them and just hand them a bunch of requirements and you haven't brought them along for the process and you haven't evolved them at all. They get very frustrated. You know, engineering is extremely hard, and you can't fake it. You know, they're like any shortcut you take in engineering shows up eventually. And so it's a very intentional group of people. They have their process, and it's important to allow them to act upon their process and bring them along. So that's it for me. You know, again, just some quick tips. You know, would love to have a conversation because, you know, going back to our original start, there's a lot of weight to move, and we all have to get stronger as an organization to help innovate, to deploy new solutions. I've got a side project called The Journeys That Matter. And it's looking into what are the journeys that for our generation are really going to define our success and happiness. And there's a lot of really big, heavy topics. You know, one of the ones I'm looking at is chronic care management. So people who are caring for aging parents with chronic diseases. It's a really heavy topic, you know, that companies aren't ready to take on because it's so much bigger than any one organization. And so this design thinking and innovation and human-centered design is going to be so important to like our happiness, because like the technology is here. Like we are living in the future right now. Like we can do anything that's possible, but like the change management, the stakeholder alignment, you know, getting these solutions to market in a way that like relates to people is what's going to be important. And we have to do it within these really complex environments. My slides just stopped for some reason. And with the agile core at the center of it, partnering with, you know, IT and infrastructure, our strategy group, operations, our line of business, and CX marketing with the organization. Got another talk on agile, so I'll leave this slide and come back to it at another point. But in summary, and these slides will be posted. You know, here's kind of the 9 things we've found that if you're able to follow these and keep these mental models in mind, generally you'll walk out of a design thinking session with a well-stated problem, 2 or 3 concepts that can be tested to validate those assumptions and allow you to kind of continually iterate coming out of that and move forward, versus having a great session that just leads to, you know, a PowerPoint that doesn't get worked through. I do like my bonus round. So a couple other things that are just pet peeves of mine that I would recommend you changing the wording on when we're talking to our teams and teaching this. Instead of saying fail fast, try to say calculated mistakes. Failure, America, we're not good at failure. It's very like failure is a bad thing from elementary school onwards, and we're taught to avoid failure. If you think about making calculated mistakes instead of failing fast, then you'll lean into the idea that you're not failing, you're learning quickly. I like to say data informed instead of data driven, but you know, data can tell you where the problems are and it can tell you if you've solved it, but data is not going to tell you what your solution should be and how to be creative. Customer journeys instead of product journeys. You know, your customer doesn't start their journey on your homepage or on your apply page. They start their journey with a job to be done well before that. I think as a whole, product folks, we can learn more from economics and engineering of looking for natural experiments in the world and thinking like economists, and add that to our product and design toolkit. I like to think about most innovation opportunities are reducing friction instead of delight. You know, most good CX is forgettable. Most good product work is forgettable. A lot of people want to just get on with their day and have a very frictionless experience, and then focus on outcomes over outputs, which is a classic agile one. So I'll stop there. Jason, I think we've got 20 minutes left, and I couldn't see the chat, so I'm not sure about what questions came through.
Didn't have a whole lot of questions come through the chat. Had some good conversation here, especially the tail end had a couple of observations from Gio and Phil, but let's just open up the floor. So just to kind of help things along a little bit, if you look at the bottom of your Zoom, you'll see there's a little reactions button if you have the most recent version. If not, it could be in the participants or the chat panel. But you got a little option to do a raised hand. If you have a question, you can also just jump right in, but especially if we start getting into some deeper discussion, if you just hit the raise hand icon, I will get people in for popping in with some questions and comments. So both questions and observations in your own experiences are really welcome. So Jeff Durnovich, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, mine is, I guess maybe Jason, I'd love to know if there's more under the covers from this one from an experience perspective, but one of the things you said that struck me the most was I'd rather have 2 people for a month to learn and iterate than the crowdsourcing of 30 people over 3 days. And I think, Jason, we had this experience when we were at IBM from Silverpop, when we started to dig into design thinking. And, I would look around the room and I would think, 10 of these people don't really understand the problem space. They're just here to facilitate. Right. And so you end up with a lot of ideas, but no ability to zero it down to what are the actual action items, the 2 or 3 things to sort of move from. So I'm curious if you have a sense for, I love the oversimplification of the 2 versus the 30, but do you have a sense for, what really is, a good number to avoid that, that just democratization mistake, if you will?
Yeah, I'm always a fan of the 2 pizza rule. I think it really starts with defining why we're using different sessions and how we're gonna work on something. And I'll pick on my friends at Ally here. I really like their model because they'll bring everyone in for the 2-day session because that's intentionally cultural to give people a voice and bring them along. And so sometimes it can be really valuable to bring people along and start with that crowdsourcing, as long as you have that long tail afterwards of people are going to really focus on it. And the part of the issue is, innovation, it's a lot of fun, but like product design and understanding how people really work, it is something that it takes a lot of reps to get good at. It is, I know it can be hard to define, but it is a skill that you get better at over time, which I'm preaching to the choir here. And I think when you have people that haven't done product or design or innovation work before, they come in, their mental model is, oh, well, I'm going to do the Uber of this, the Spotify of this, the Facebook of this. Oh, should we add a Domino's pizza tracker? The mental model of their experience is not going to be as deep as a product person who has been doing this for a long time and understands the nuances of a problem. And so those sessions can be really great for like top of the funnel ideation, bring in different ideas. I like to, when I can, bring in someone completely out of industry. So, hey, bring in an IoT person to a bank, let's bring from other industries and do that. And so if you can keep it from 8 to 12, I always do it as based on how I'm going to do breakout rooms, what's the meaningful number of people who are going to be able to participate? And once you get, Zoom is nice, and we can do, I've got 3 blog posts out about how to do Zoom sessions because we had to learn that this past year. And you can do it with 20, 25 people. It's exhausting, but if I want something that's going to be tight and not going to be heavily broken out, I try to do 8 to 10. And I can get everyone meaningfully interacting that way.
How many did we do with that one back in January, Jason? We had something like 30 people in one of them.
Yeah.
That was challenging.
Yeah, that was Jason's second week at Skookum. So yeah, right out of the nest.
We still walked away, and just to kind of get to your point from my perspective, Jeff, also as we, when we had that big one, that we probably had too many people in some of the sessions it ended up changing the agenda pretty drastically. We walked in with a specific plan, but partway into it, we identified frankly a better plan, especially given the audience that we had. And so, being able to pivot on that a little bit and carry it in a different direction still brought a great deal of success. The outcomes were different than what we expected when we walked in the door. But that's one of the keys as well. When you get that level of participation, thinking about, once again, the outcomes that you're going for versus the process that you're going through, and making sure that you're thinking about, okay, I've got more participation. I got a lot of people here, or I don't have enough people here, but there's still a goal that we've got. Let's think about how we can get to that goal and develop some insights. Let's pivot over to anybody else want to jump in on that before I pivot over to Giovanni? All right. Let's go to Giovanni. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks. One of the comments that Jason made about respecting the engineers really stood out to me, and I just wanted to kind of piggyback on that because, full disclosure, my background is as a design director. So it took many years for especially the younger designers on the team, and myself to some extent, to not get so focused on the look and feel. It's important, but it can be a distraction. And we often did not have developers and engineers in the room when we were ideating and problem solving and so on. And the past year at the studio, we had a developer sitting with us every day for a year, and it made such a huge difference. It's eye-opening. And it's, in addition to coming up with a better result or a solution, it helps the culture too, to be inclusive like that, and to have everyone at the table from the start. So that really resonated with me.
No, 100%. And I think I think for designers and product people in general, like understanding how front end development is evolving and happening can be really important, because you might build a design and there might be 2 or 3 ways to solve a problem with a design, and one might be 10x the amount of code. And understanding that like you're potentially 10xing the code without tangible value is something that's hard for product and design people to intuitively understand, but it's really important to know that with an engineer. Same thing, you take AI, machine learning, data and analytics and intelligence. Like you might be able to, rather than doing a full AI machine learning implementation solution, you might be able to get away with a simple rules engine. And like now we're up above 10x, we're in the 50x level of effort. And so having those engineers of being able to say like, hey, I get where you're going. I think we could get 90% of the value for 10% of the work here is really impactful to have that up front, because otherwise, like if they get brought in late, they're going to take your requirements and assume they've been vetted. But if you can bring them earlier into the process and vetting it, I'm a fan of even like putting the engineers in the user interviews on a product they're working with. Like let them get closer to the client as well. Like everyone needs to be close to the client. Like let the development team be customer centric, because they are part of the value chain of creating that. So I'm very passionate about this topic and the importance of it.
Totally agree.
JB, you're on mute.
Let's go to Andy Bowden.
Yeah, I guess my question to Jason is like, do you have specific tools you use when you bring each groups together? Is it just one big brainstorming session, or what is it you do that tries to hone in on, the right sort of design thinking that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely leverage the double diamond model of kind of divergent thinking, converge around what the problem is, diverge around solutions, converge. I think, when we're like scoping design thinking work with a client, I tend to scope it in 3 parts. And, the first part is, how are we preparing for the session? Like, what are our inputs? Like, where are we starting from? Like, what research has been done? What does the actual workshop look like? Is it a week long? Is it 2 days? Is it, a 3-hour workshop? And then what are we doing afterwards? Like, and so one of the things that we always talk about is like working backwards from, okay, we're going to do this design thinking session. What are the outputs? Who is taking those? And what are they going to do with those? And so a couple of like tricks that I've liked to use, if we're not going to be able, and it's harder during COVID, if we don't have personas, if we're not going to be able to paper prototype and go test with people, we'll go and just interview a bunch of users and we will parse that into a short video, and we'll play it at the beginning of the session to ground people in the actual user journey. So Jason and I are right now, we're working with a healthcare system, for example, to help with their the selection process for finding a provider. So, and we're doing it for orthopedics and for their cancer patients. They didn't have personas. We weren't going to be able to get users in the room. So we went and we just talked to people who have gone through this experience, and we made a video and we play it at the beginning of the session. That's really helpful for grounding people in like who people really are and what the real problem is. And it kind of centers you on that. In groups that are really difficult, so, we'll get pulled in to teach design thinking to people that are like field engineers or project managers traditionally, and not doing true product. I will, I try to go really slow and make sure everyone's along for the ride. And as soon as someone gets really confused, I'll take that outcome of like, all right, this is the product we're trying to build. This is the outcome. And I will work backwards step by step of, to build this product, here are all the inputs. Here's the backlog, here's the designs, here's the architecture. And I will show them like what the inputs are to each stage until we get to the workshop. And I will show them what we're going to do in the workshop and kind of connect those dots to the ultimate output of what the ultimate goal, to put their role in the workshop and what we're doing in context to the bigger picture. So it's not necessarily a design thinking exercise, but we'll do, and then in terms of how I always structure the design thinking exercises, I always try to let people think as individuals, let them talk as small groups, and then theme as a large group. And so, I always try to give people time to get with their own thoughts, because otherwise you end up with just the loudest voice in the room dominating, and then let them talk as a small group, and then let them bring everything to the big group. So that way you're always building up without anchoring around any single person's opinion, so you can get that diversity of concepts.
Yeah. I guess I was my little second part of the question, where you answered some of it, was how do you avoid biasness around, a foregone conclusion of the answer. Sounds like some of that you just described kind of helps that along.
Yeah, and also like really intentional about group makeup. Don't put someone in a group with their boss. Like try to get a feel for the culture of an organization up front, and especially if they're traditionally a top-down culture. So like we did one recently that Jason was mentioning, that like the CTO, the chief product officer were all in there, and like the chief technology officer had a vision. He was, he had a great personality, really smart guy. I made sure in those sessions to challenge him in front of the rest of the group, so that they felt it was okay to challenge him as well. And then I will encourage that. And you kind of have to create that tension and force it to happen. Because otherwise, if you don't have that tension, you end up with a product that is just the average of everyone's ideas. And you haven't made any, like, people avoid those hard conversations because they want everyone to feel like their idea made it. But like, that's not going to make your company money. It's going to give you a compromise.
Yeah. Average ideas lead to average results.
Yeah. One thing I've read recently, I forget what book it was in, but committees can't create, they can critique. And so once you get to something that's committee size, you're in critique mode versus creation mode. Like, creation has to happen in like a more of a safe environment, a safe space that doesn't have the bias and allows for experimentation.
So we've got a question in the chat as well from Katie, who said, I heard sometimes design thinking is the new waterfall. What are your suggestions on how to bring in design thinking into every iteration or sprint or release instead of just the crowdsourcing in the very beginning?
Oh man, we're going to need another hour, Jason. I've also heard safe is the new waterfall, but that we'll have to do another talk on that. I think, first of all, knowing that design thinking is not a box to be checked a session. It is a process. It is a muscle that you get better at over time. I think the second thing is, when we're working with design teams and helping them build out the design role and the design toolkit, knowing that every problem doesn't deserve the same approach and the same session, and being really intentional about using design thinking where it is a problem that deserves the design thinking approach. Some problems have existing solutions with existing design patterns and best practices that have been solved, that you just need to bring in. You need to have like an expert who has solved that problem and knows how to do it, and having a bunch of ideas on how to do it of people who aren't familiar with the problem isn't necessarily going to help you innovate on it. So I think the first thing is, when you're going to have your design team in, like, make sure it's the right problem where you can do design thinking, and be a part of it. So for example, like if your company has issues with their authentication, username setup, and password reset, there's a lot of really good information around authentication. Unless you have a room full of people who understand the authentication and passive and active authentication space, like, it's going to be hard to do design thinking on that. And you might be better not doing design thinking and just having people who know that space go straight into prototyping and development. So that's one thing, is like, always make sure it's a problem that deserves that heaviness, the work that goes with design thinking, and it's big enough to conceptually explore. I like the concept in it, and it's from a book called More Effective Agile by Steve McConnell, who did Demystifying Software Estimation as well. He talks about the difference between complex problems and complicated problems. A complicated problem is one where the cause of the problem, the effects of the solution, are well understood and that connection is well established. A complex problem is one where the cause and effect of a solution is not well understood. So there's a difference between a problem where there's likely 1 or 2 solutions versus where there's 10 solutions. When there's 10 different solutions to a problem and a ton of ways you could go, that's when design thinking is helpful. And so bringing in at the right time of the process is my recommendation. I think, just like you have to respect the engineers, I think respecting design and product and bringing them in earlier in the process in the organization is really important. But design also has to tell the story of why that's valuable and how it makes the business or saves them money down the line. And having design early in, the goal should be to iterate at a lower fidelity before you're developing product, where it is a lot cheaper to make those calculated mistakes. So yeah, would love to talk more on that topic. That might be a good one we can take offline and talk about.
We've got time for one more real quick one. So Kevin Lewis, you got your hand up. Let's switch over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Fantastic talk. Really, really helpful. Completely aligned on everything you said, but enjoyed hearing it from a different perspective. So thank you. Question for you. It's a real quick one. I know it'd be super easy. You talked about something that really caught my ear, which was picking up constraints early enough in the process and make sure to factor those in. It's tough. Obviously, if you bring them in too soon and you calculate those in, you're not going to hit delight, and you're just going to hit whatever the company's capable of. So, not too much true opportunity for innovation. What are your thoughts on how to bring them early enough? When is early enough, and how to factor those in?
Yeah. So a couple kind of tricks I like to use. So as mentioned, making sure you have the people who understand those constraints in the room is important. Whether that's your engineering team, whether it's legal risk and compliance, whether it's the people that on the business side who understand the P&L and the impacts on financing, whether it's someone on the ops side who's going to have to support it. Like, where are the constraints likely to come from, and make sure you have that expertise in the room is one thing. The second thing that I like to do is when you're ideating, calling out and assigning someone to be the devil's advocate. Like, if you don't call it out as someone's job, like, people are too nice, and it's like forcing and rotate the role. So like everyone has a devil's advocate. But then my favorite one is, you don't need to know every constraint for why a solution might work. You need to know the biggest ones. And you have to build around those big rocks. So I'll use the question I like to use is, if we're discussing a solution, what would have to be true for this idea to work? And whether that's a technical assumption, whether it's a user testing, the goal is to find the biggest rock and figure out a way to test and move past that rock. Because anything else other than overcoming the biggest assumption is a waste of time until you've validated that big assumption, because it's not your bottleneck to getting the solution to market. So focusing on what that bottleneck is in the solution is what I'd recommend. And so, Kevin, if you and I both had an idea and we were in a session and we were disagreeing about whose idea was better, like, rather than, having everyone vote about it, I would get to ask you, like, all right, Kevin, you're not necessarily bought into my idea. What would have to be true for you to buy into this idea? And you are setting the acceptance criteria for my idea and you get to set the data and the context, but you know, it's a little prisoner's dilemma because I get to do the same thing for your idea. And then we get to test each other's idea. And it's that one big assumption. And so we're focused on how do we validate this concept, not like, and that's how I introduce the constraints, is through that exercise on consumption. And you just have to get people thinking that direction with the right people in the room.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, and that puts us at 9:01, so we're a minute over. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Jason. I've got some great feedback and interaction here. And for those who are already in the LinkedIn group, we can continue this discussion over at the Product Coffee LinkedIn group. You can go to productcoffee.com/group to sign up for that, and we'll get you in the conversation over there as well. So thanks a lot, Jason. The slides have been posted to the website, and we'll have a link to the recording, directly to the recording in the notes as well when it's ready, probably later tonight. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week for the kickoff of the market research series by Pragmatic Institute. So thanks a lot, folks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.